On the show today, Jenifer Trivelli. So Jenifer was at the Embodiment conference and did a session on working with mindfulness and youth there. She's the director of Wise Mind Educational Services, describes herself as an emotional and social educator. I think I got that right. And really just down-to-earth approach to some sometimes complex things. So I've really enjoyed seeing the talk at Tech that she did. And I'm looking forward to this today. I'm in Mexico at an Airbnb, but it looks like we've got good enough Wi-Fi where we are. Where are you in the world today, Jenifer?
I'm in the Pacific Northwest of the USA, so we've actually got snow coming down outside right now, opposite of you.
It's pretty different. I've just been dancing here, so even sweatier. And okay, great. Well, welcome, first of all. It's nice to have you on. How did you get interested in this topic? What was the beginning of your journey?
The very beginning was deciding that I wanted to be a different kind of parent than the parenting I got when I was growing up. But the entry into this field with youth really came as an elementary school counselor in a super small town, middle of Oregon. We're talking like 1,100 people for the population. And I was getting my degree as I was beginning the work with this population and realizing that I have no tools to be able to effectively begin to help the kids in my care. So everything that I've put together has sort of come postgraduate degree.
Okay, and why young people in particular? Because as I understand it, that's kind of your specialism, right? Is translating this neuroscience and meditation and stuff like this to young people. Why young people?
Oh, young people are our future. You could stop the cycle at any point in the human journey, but I think working with young people is so rewarding, so effective, and particularly nurturing to my own inner child that needed something different as I was growing up and didn't really get it.
You know, there's something in there, isn't there? It's like, what did I not get as a kid or as a teen that I would love kids and teens to get now? Like, and I think there's a sort of wounded healer for a lot of us, you know, like in there.
Yeah, and in the other place of that is really understanding how we are in this time. We have access to so much information, and our parents really didn't have access to all this information. And so that's part of what I love about doing conferences and podcasts and things where we get to reach this bigger audience is, hey, I've gone and picked some things from the field that are really important, really valuable, and here's the bite-sized version of that.
Yeah, and what I loved about what I saw of your presentation at Tech was just how accessible it was. Now, then you made this wonderful quote, which is something like, I think from Albert Einstein, if you can't explain something to a 10-year-old, you don't really understand it. And
yeah.
was that Einstein?
Yeah.
So what is it you'd like to explain in this sort of simple way to young people? Let's give us the sense of your topics and then we'll dive into them.
Yeah. So from my view, everything that we experience in our lives, our big feelings, our interactions with other people, we can really bring it to this basic neuroscience place of understanding how we're wired to be. And our brains were existing in these brains that weren't built for the time that we're in. There's so many pressures and so much stress that we all encounter as part of this tech world that we're in. And so the really basic idea of it comes from Dan Siegel's work. And listeners who are familiar with his hand model of the brain might recognize this language, but with kids, I share, when you get a really big feeling, these signals travel from your body and go up into the brain in your head. And it goes first to your protector brain. And your protector brain decides if there's enough discomfort in my body or enough alarm in my body, then my lid flips and my protector brain takes over all my brain power. And you might know this, they've done brain studies on this. All of the oxygen gets reduced, the blood flow gets reduced to these lower areas of the brain. But I thought of calling it the protector brain so kids would understand what its job was. When we get into fight or flight or we go into shutdown, it's really a survival oriented response, even though it might not be a physically threatening event in our surroundings. So the way I phrase it is our first job is to get our wise minds back online. And I talk with parents about this, educators about this. And the trick is when we use mind-body tools, we're activating the body system to try to help the wise mind come back online. And they found that 80% of that information flow happens from the body up to our brain. So when we do body-oriented strategies, we're accessing 80% of that flow instead of trying to do a top-down strategy, calm down, whatever thinking thing we might be trying to access. We're only using 20% of that information flow to make a difference. So that's the basic part of it.
Great, and we could take that apart for the next hour, couldn't we? There's loads there. And I just want to point listeners really to the language. Like you say, wise mind instead of, I guess, neocortex, or protector brain instead of, I don't know, limbic hijack or something, amygdala hijack or something. And yes, big feelings. Like this is language that even a relatively young child could probably get their head around.
Yes, 3-year-olds, as young as I would say 3, 2. It is really accessible. And the reason, when I looked out and saw what was being done with neuroscience in kids, things were sort of made into cutesy cartoons, and it was like Annie amygdala or things like that. And I just thought, to a kid, they don't care what part of the brain that is. But if I say your protector brain, that gives them the information they need to understand what's happening with them in that moment, instead of having to like, who is Annie amygdala again, and what did she do?
Because I think I might use this terminology when I'm teaching adults, frankly, because it saves the translation piece, doesn't it? It just says straight away, okay, this part of your brain, this is what it's for. And I like that the language like protector brain isn't sort of judgmental. You know, it's not like angry brain. You know, it's something. It's like, okay, it has this positive function, but maybe it takes over from the wise mind, which isn't, you know, maybe such a good thing. Do you think it's sort of unnecessarily complicated? Because there's almost a sort of status claiming in using scientific jargon that I see, which is sort of like, look, I don't know if you know this, but I'm clever because I know what this bit of the brain is called. And I'm like, well, that doesn't really make you any cleverer. It just means you learn a thing from a book, you know?
Yes, I 100% agree. And I also agree with your noticing that protector brain takes out the stigma of it being a right or wrong thing, and it's really just how we're wired. And actually, how we talk quite a bit about how our protector brains are so useful, and we're so glad we have them. What if a car was speeding down the road and we had to get out of there fast? We'd want that system to work really well.
For me, there's something in also in acknowledging the good stuff there, you know, for grown-ups as well, in that it's like that part of the brain is sort of raw. There's a battery cell to it, or it's definitely, you know, part of sexual attraction in adults, for example. If you're not tuned into that, it's not very sexy, right? Like that's something positive to be tuned into.
Yeah. I think the connection that I would make in my field with young people and educators and parents would be like your aliveness.
That's aliveness, really nice. I like aliveness. You simplified it again. Any other good terminology then? I like aliveness. I like protector brain. Any other good terminology where we're sort of laying out all the pieces here? Things that you find yourself saying quite often while going through this.
Yeah, I think the other, if I could say one more word, it's noticing. And that really, whether I'm offering neuroscience or I'm offering mindfulness and movement, if I'm working one-on-one with somebody or in a big group, really the strategy comes down to that noticing, and that's that mindfulness component kind of bridged with somatics, noticing something concrete, felt in my body, my connection to my chair. Peter Levine talks about noticing like the space around you and orienting to your room. So noticing would be another really simple.
I love it. So simple. We don't have to talk about Satipatthana Sutta or something. We can just talk about noticing. What do you notice? Are you noticing stuff? What do you notice in your body? What do you notice in the room? What 5 things that are red do you notice? Like we could use that very down to earth language without getting all sort of Buddhist on it either, because that's another status claiming jargon, right? We've got the sciencey one and the Buddhisty one.
Yep.
So
yeah.
Okay, yeah. Cool. So why is this important? Now, I kind of know, I think, but why is this important? Like if someone said, why do kids need to know this? You know, surely this is some sort of coachy yoga teacher jargon. You know, why on earth is this necessary for kids to have a good sense of? Well, how would you reply to that?
Yeah. So the neuroscience answer is when we work on these connections between our mind and body, we access the part of our brain I'm calling wise mind. It's the prefrontal cortex. And that part of our brain is responsible for everything that's important to us as parents and educators: morality, empathy, response flexibility, fear extinguishment, anxiety regulation, pretty much everything that you could want to hope for your child to be able to have a successful adulthood. So by practicing these things, we're teaching specific skills, but we're also changing the structure of our brains.
Okay, so it's sort of helping people develop and access, we might say, the better part of ourselves, or the part of ourselves that is necessary. As you know, I feel like I by the way, I got into drug and alcohol addiction quite young, and I'm pretty sure I arrested that development, and I'm now sort of catching up. I think I'm probably about the level of a 17 or 18-year-old now, and you know, in terms of inhibition control, like a morality, maybe not that one, but the other thing is it's not developed at like 18, right? Like it takes a little while. It takes longer than people think.
Yes, I think what you just spoke to is really important in our conversation about young people, because so the original sort of thoughts were this part of the brain develops till 25, and then they found that people with attention difficulties, it'll go up to age 30, 31, and then when you bring in adverse childhood experiences or traumatic experiences, those parts of us can get stunted at that age that the trauma occurred for us. So it's really, these practices are useful for a lifetime. And Dan Siegel talks about a client he had who was 99 years old, who came home, you know, to his wife after some treatment, and she was like, this is a totally different person, his wife of 60 or 70 years. So this neuroplasticity, this ability of our brains to change and grow through time, never stops, which is really hopeful.
There's hope even for grown 41-year-old teenagers like me. So how do we grow it? How do we develop it? Those of us who are out there thinking either they've got a teenager, or like me, they sort of am a teenager. So is that good English? Not really. So how do we develop it in ourselves and our teams and our children?
Yeah, that question was really frustrating for me on my own personal journey with this, because I'm more academically inclined, or at least I was in my journey, you know, straight A's, blah, blah. And so I would just dive into research on things. And no matter where I look, the answer would be often, in more plain terms, you need a co-regulatory nervous system of another person to help you move past the places where you get stuck. And so it's really why I moved. I got a graduate degree in counseling, and I was working in the schools with this, and my principal handed me a flyer for a youth yoga program and said, hey, why don't you check this out? And my mind was kind of blown open since then. And I really, in my work, when people come to me and like, I have this going on with my kid or whatever, I want them in my yoga class. I want them in my mindfulness class, because then we're learning the skills. We're doing it all together. It's more accessible. Hey, I'm not the only one being shoved to the counselor's office because I'm bad or there's something wrong with me. It's just a beautiful way of experiencing that in a much more community-oriented way.
And the community part there is part of the co-regulation, right? Like I was explaining to a friend of mine yesterday, she said, why do you go to 12-step? I go to AA. I've been sober for years now. And I said, well, there's a ritual and there's a togetherness, and we sort of say things together. You know, we did a serenity prayer together. And then I said that togetherness is really important for me. And yes, I meditate. Yes, I do my yoga practice, because the physical, obviously I'm an embodiment guy, right? Like I do that. Like that's super well useful for my regulation. But there's something about that church, in inverted commas, that community aspect. And we even said, like, why are we going to this yoga class tonight? Because we've both been doing yoga for like 20 years, right? We're like, so why the hell are we going to, you know, Jilly McSmarty Pants has just done her yoga teacher training, and you know, it's probably done yes longer than we have, but we wanted to be in a class with other people doing yoga, right? Yeah. Because there's something regulatory about that doing things with others.
Something regulating about it, and also that whole systems idea of our parts together make up a greater whole than what our own part in isolation can make up.
So the idea of a sort of lone counselor, now on the one hand, that's great because it's, you know, someone regulating with you, but not moving, sitting in a chair, and simultaneously just two people rather than any kind of community that might have a bigger gestalt, as you say there. Like my hearing is there was sort of something missing for you in the body and something else rather than just the sort of counseling, which is not bad. I'm not against it.
Yeah. There's to me, I would use the word ineffective. It just felt so ineffective doing it that way. And to clarify, I do work individually with people now, and we can do this somatic sort of mapping and journeying in a present moment sense without needing to move, but sometimes we can also bring movement into it. So there's this really beautiful blend. You know, I don't feel like I fit with the counselors, and I definitely don't fit with the yoga teachers. So it's sort of this space in between where I think a lot more of us, people in the embodiment field, people in the mental health field, are finding this gray zone is really the best benefit for people.
It's almost an awkward space, isn't it? Like I was doing a psychology degree while studying lots of Aikido at university, and there wasn't much space in the middle. It's like the body-mind practice and then the psychological theory. And now I do start to see people bringing, who are practitioners of Buddhism, but who have, a neuroscience background. It seems like it's this sort of clumsy new kind of love child of East and West happening.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason I love working with youth is they have like a high BS radar. And so if you're really like, I'm a Buddhist or I'm a yoga teacher and look at me, or you're like, I'm a therapist and I'm got my spectacles and looking down, they call you out. Like you can't get away with that with young people. So it feels really hopeful and renewing for me to spend time with young people because they can call that out, and because I can listen and hear how they interface with that in the world and how hard that is on their souls.
So I agree. I've also worked a lot with young people, and I find that bullshit radar to be wonderful. Young people get kind of a lot of stick these days. You'll hear people talking about, and I say young, I mean anyone under 41, obviously that's a young person. So they're millennials, they can't concentrate, they're always on their phones. I mean, there is this tech difference as well, right? Anything you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think that's an important place where we can offer information to them, because on one hand, it's expanding and opening for them. I'm thinking specifically of an 8-week series I did in a classroom in a high school, and several of the students ended up following me on Instagram after that. So I've got to follow their journeys, and they're still following along with me, and that in one way expanded information to them that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to access. And I think there's a lot of teens who are really using it in positive ways to find community, to find quotes that inspire them, to find other kinds of ideas and resources outside of their nuclear family that they're living with. But the opportunity comes to offer my own journey, for example, that I notice when I'm on social media that my life becomes really smaller, and that I have a hard time regulating with my family and the people around me. And so youth invite us to share our own personal work in ways that allow them to access it differently, instead of mom or dad, like, don't do this, you have too much screen time, you're going to get that taken away. There's no skill building in that, and there's no honesty.
Right, it's enforced. Do you think they're wired differently? So I'm sort of glad my brain grew up at least a bit before Facebook. I got off social media a month or so ago, and I actually feel a bit different. Like I actually feel different in my mind. Like, and maybe it's subtle. I'm just noticing because I'm a meditator, but I'm like, oh, and I did immediately get addicted to Bitcoin trading instead on my phone. But it was, I do feel better for getting off the social media on my phone. But I'm also aware that my brain developed before that. I didn't really have a mobile till I was 21. I think I was quite late adopter. So, while I had other challenges, I didn't have that. And I do wonder if they are wired differently as a result of growing up with this kind of stuff.
Right. If there's that instant gratification of I press the button and this thing happens, how do I, if I were to take that into a mindfulness way of looking at that, how do I notice what happens in me as I'm using my phone? There's mindfulness practices where you give someone else your phone and you notice what's coming up for you, or you stick.
That's a great practice. Yeah. You pass over your phone and it's like part of you's been grabbed. And some really good mindfulness practice using mobile phones. I pioneered these actually, and I've seen a few more now. Like we do yoga holding mobile phones, and we sort of see what it does. And it's you get Facebook out where you're in tree pose and see what it does. I mean, there's
I'm gonna use that one.
Feel free, steal it. There's not much integration. It's sort of yoga and meditation as an island away from phones and social media, but never really trying to integrate them. I notice at the end of a yoga class, people rush to turn their phones on again and immediately lose all the mindfulness they've spent the last 90 minutes so hard developing.
Right. You brought up something about Aikido. You were doing Aikido while you were getting your psychology degree, and I wanted to bridge that with the aliveness conversation that we were having earlier. I'm just talking a lot about this with parents lately, but this idea, instead of telling kids to calm down and pushing them down and get your body still, and it's just a constant message of shutting down and clamping down. We understand that this movement and this energy is aliveness, and we just look at it from that perspective instead of making it right or wrong, and we offer opportunities like martial arts or other ways to feel strong and powerful and energized in your physical body. How I think that's suicide prevention. I think we're really tackling that. Yeah.
If you look at the body of the sort of depressed teenager, there's a sort of limpness to it, and I see that and I go, karate, weightlifting, hip hop dance. Like I look at that and I go, that's what that kid needs, is something that puts a bit of oomph in their system.
Yes. Yeah, I think coronavirus and pandemic and all of that, I think that the youth mental health is really the pandemic that we're maybe not all super aware of. I became aware of it maybe 2 or 3 years ago in my own state. I looked up the stats and I was horrified. I just absolutely could not believe the number of youth that we had committing suicide just in my state. And so I've sort of started taking mindfulness and neuroscience and movement and trying to tie in the suicide prevention part. And I think that aliveness is a big part of it. And I think a lot of adults who care for kids unwittingly squash that and make that problem more challenging in young people's nervous systems by giving them the message that they should be calm and docile and follow directions all the time.
Right, and that is the conditioning of the average scholastic system, often through no fault of teachers. They're just trying to get through the day with big class sizes and things. And as you say, like, something is seriously fucking wrong when we have sort of record numbers of child suicides. I mean, even the phrase child suicide was fairly new to me about 10 years ago. And obviously in America, you have the school shooting thing as well, child murderers as well as child suicides. That's pretty disturbing. There's a great South Park episode where they sort of show how casual everyone's got about school shootings. And I think the same thing around child suicides, getting casual about what is not a casual issue. It's like, let's really take that seriously and see, the societal level. You also mentioned lockdown and COVID. So I think we should talk about this, because I've been noticing, I'm in Mexico and I'm dancing, eating outside, hanging out with friends, laughing over tacos yesterday. And, with lots of nice co-regulation happening. It's a very co-regulatory kind of place, Mexico, as well, actually, I found. Lots of sort of social connections between people. And I've been Zooming my colleagues and friends in Europe, who are mostly on fairly severe lockdown in the Netherlands, Germany, England. And I've been noticing over the last couple of months, I've been getting more and more tanned and happy. And they've been getting more and more miserable and fucked up, basically. And it seems, yes, and teens maybe even more so, because they have to have that co-regulation. Like, that's why teenagers love each other's company, right? Like, it's a big deal when you're 15 to hang out with your friends. So I kind of go, what's your thoughts on the sort? We don't have to get too conspiracy tin hat about it, but it does seem like there's some pretty human needs not being met right now.
I think my heart broke when all of this happened, because it seemed like we were starting to make such progress in understanding mental health and emotional wellness as part of physical health and wellness. Not this, maybe if there's nothing really like big going on physically, then we can start to address mental and emotional wellness, but that huge interlink. And I saw so much movement happening towards that on these policy levels, system levels, and then coronavirus came, and it's like all that went out the window.
Everyone forgot about it, didn't they? I was going, guys, like, we don't do medical advice on this show because I'm not a doctor and we don't have doctors on generally. But I was like, well, surely we should be considering that there's some dangers physically. My cousin's a respiratory doctor in the NHS, so it's not a laughing matter, the physical stuff. But equally, if everyone's getting mental health and killing themselves and getting drug addicted and God knows what else, like, that's really bad too. So we should, in our policy making, whether it's masks, isolation, how many people can be in a bubble, whether you're allowed to have sex or not, whatever it is, like we should be considering the mental, social, and emotional health, because that is physical health. Like there's a reason everyone's immune system's got better in summer in England. They're outside, they're socializing. So it's dangerous on one level now, but on the other level, it's helping your immune system, surely.
Yes, I agree with all that.
How do we weigh that? Like, no one's trying to weigh that at the moment.
Yeah.
It's either just pure medical, like physical, don't get the virus, very reductionist physical perspective, or just in denial of that and sort of going on about life as business, this sort of idiotic denial as well. So it's like, where's the balancing? And how would you even begin to go, okay, like how do you make that equation in your head? Like if I eat with friends, that's increased COVID exposure, but it's going to be great for my immune system. Like how do I personally make that choice, and let alone let the government make it for me? Like, do I give up hugs? Like I have friends that didn't get hugged all through lockdowns, Like, is it more dangerous to not get hugged, or is it more dangerous to hug someone who might have COVID?
Right.
I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know how you weigh that statistically, but it should be a question, right? It should be a question. Yes. Like, what bad effect is this having on our teenagers that they're all with each other? And of course, they're going to resist and rebel against that, and go out and kind of co-regulate in parks and whatever.
Right. I just say yes to all of that. And I think that's where I'm going to toe the line a little bit here. I think that's where we get into talking maybe more about oppression or that shutting down of things when we're talking about a sweeping mandate for every person that has to do with physical, mental, and emotional well-being, because we all are individuals and we all interact with things in a different way.
Well, in itself, that also takes away autonomy, which is a massive well-being factor, right? The autonomy, and that's a replication of what happens to children and young people, is their autonomy gets taken away, and that in itself is bad for your health. Like there's a wonderful study on the British government, which shows that people in the civil service, they call it in the UK, that drink and smoke and eat loads of bad food, but have loads of autonomy, have way better health outcomes than people who don't do those things, but kind of get told what to do all day long.
I believe that.
There's hard data on that. That's not like a conspiracy theory. There's hard data on those kind of studies. So the autonomy piece is really under question right now, right? And it's hard to have this conversation in a sort of mature, balanced way without, and I can see maybe a little, tell me if I'm wrong here, a little anxiety as we talk about this, as like, ooh, I don't want to be put into that box.
Yeah, or, ooh, my box is this one, so here's where I'm going to be during this whole conversation. I'm not going to even play in any other gray zones that might be outside of the box label that I give myself.
Okay, so what do you want everyone to know? Let's say we give you TV time on CNN, Fox, all the networks. We say, right, BBC, Al Jazeera, Russia Today, and you've got 10 minutes of TV time, and everybody sits down their kids and teenagers in front of the TV, and they say, listen to Auntie Jenifer. Where would you begin? Where would you begin with that?
Be something like whatever you're experiencing, there's an explanation for. And what might be useful or helpful in understanding is this piece that you said about choice. When we get our choice taken away, that's one definition of trauma. When something overwhelming happens to us and we don't have control or say over what we do or how we move through that time. So it's really important to understand if you're experiencing signs of protector brain takeover, that's the way I talk about it, such as you need to move around quite a bit, or you're like poking at the people in your family, or you're destroying things, or you're okay 1 minute and then all of a sudden you flip and you're into another space. All of those are normal reactions to a situation that is possibly traumatizing for you. And trauma isn't what happens to us. It's about how we feel and how we're supported through that process. So having one always available adult is really important for young people. If you decide that your physical health is in jeopardy by being in an actual space with someone, then really being conscious and intentional about creating community and a sense of connection for kids with other adults through whatever means you have available to you can be really neutralizing through this experience. But beyond that, finding ways to have a felt sense of embodied power in you, for kids, for parents, for everybody, really having a sense of efficacy and confidence and strength in your physical self, and being able to do things with your physical body is going to help mitigate any of those effects of stress or trauma or protector brain takeover.
Great. You said a few things that I wanted to dig into a bit. So the first thing you said alone is profound, isn't it? Which is that by understanding there are reasons for things, we're not lost in confusion. Like, for example, today I'm fasting. So I've had various sort of ups and downs in my mood and energy levels, but I know I'm fasting. So I go, excuse me if I'm a bit grumpy right now, I'm just hungry, right? And then tomorrow, second day of fasting, I'll probably get a big energy surge. That's normally what happens on the second day. There's a sort of, because I've done it a bunch of times, I kind of know the rhythm, and someone else's biology might be there, you know, their female cycle or whatever. And it's like, okay, right now I'm stressed, I'm in agitation, I'm in that fight or flight. Okay, I'm finding it hard to concentrate. So just having some basic understanding of our, I'd say, neurophysiology, right? There's different parts to this. It really helps us not take it fucking personally and blame it on ourselves or the world. And go, okay, right now, this is the sort of conditions I'm in, and maybe there's some reasons for this. And that just takes a lot of the sting out and a lot of the confusion, right?
Yes. So just to bring this into more of a concrete example for listeners, if you have a kiddo who's already got risk factors going on, or they already have difficult things happening, or they've had trauma in their history, and then something like this happens and you've got the confusion and the overwhelm on top of it, you can just imagine how that's like an unsolvable paradox for them. They don't have any tools to navigate the difficult things they've already been through. And when you add all of this mass stuff on top of it, where is a young person supposed to go with all of that lost and confused and overwhelmed?
What I've been noticing as well is, yes, there is a skill of interoception. I've got better at noticing my moods. And the other thing I'm noticing, though, is that we can be sort of slowly boiled frogs. Like, I don't think most of my British colleagues realize what a bad state they're in until they look at my tanned face on the Zoom and get jealous. Like, there's a sort of, until, like, I don't feel fast until I met my super slow hippie friend last night. And there's only in that contrast that sometimes because I've got used to this state of trauma or stress, or at the moment this sort of disconnected anxiety.
Yes. So I'm going to take a guess at your journey with this, because you have experienced hard things in your life. You were more I'm going to jump out of this pot because I can feel the intricacies of it getting hotter. You had more of a sense of that.
Actually, I don't think I was able to feel the level of chronic hyperarousal I was in at one point. And most of my Russian colleagues aren't aware of the kind of cultural numbing that's just endemic in Russia. So, you know, whether it's individual or cultural level or just the zeitgeist, like right now in England, it's a very different zeitgeist. I think people are just not spotting that. It's invisible because everyone around you has it, and it's sort of developed slowly over weeks, months, or years.
Yeah.
So sort of mindfulness doesn't help in that situation much, right?
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, there's something about the difference in relationship that makes me, I'm thinking out loud here as I often do on these shows. Sometimes listeners get frustrated. They're like, why are you talking? It's because it's a conversation. But it's in the difference that I can sometimes feel that.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking of a handful of parents I've worked with in the last year who we're like, is it okay for me to post my happy things on Instagram because there's so many people in the world who are suffering right now? And there's this sort of like, am I allowed to feel this level of joy or aliveness? And I think of that contrast that you're talking about, and what we were able to find through some conversation actually between people was seeing other people's joy, seeing you tan and happy sparks something. And if somebody feels like, oh, they shouldn't be posting that, they shouldn't be happy, we're all miserable, that's more about them and their own stuff that's going on, instead of about the person who's just sharing the happiness that my kid read a book today, or we have this gorgeous food on the table, or whatever it might be, or dancing in Mexico. That's a little different, but yeah.
Yeah. And it does seem like this information is starting to get out there now. Like I hear, parents talking about co-regulation, and, like sort of my niece has got ADHD, and she's in some sort of classes that have some of this language, and she has some cool books about ADHD that I'd never had, that kind of explain some of this in normal language, like the kind of language you use in your books. And that is, maybe we should be a little bit hopeful that this stuff is starting to get normalized, even if there's been this, it's a bit like the stock market. It's taken a hit lately with COVID, but it seems like the stock's generally going up, right? The kind of trauma aware. If you had stocks in trauma awareness, they're still on an upward curve over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I would agree. And events like the Embodiment conference, how that really made information accessible to a wider audience than was ever available before. And I think with everything shutting down, we are going more online, and that information is getting out there in bigger ways.
Yeah, I don't know who thought that conference was a great idea. And there's the things like the conference are almost a new problem now. There's too much information. I'm listening to Dan Segal's ebook because I walk down the street, and I download your session at the Embodiment conference. Then I do a body, mind centering dance class, and it's like, whoa, there's almost too much out there. So there's a sort of overwhelm of information as the next problem, isn't there, that we have?
Yes, I totally agree with you, and that's sort of where I love to be, is breaking this stuff down into such accessible, small, meaningful, and understandable language. For not just for kids, it's really for educators, it's for parents. I had a counseling cohort hired me to come speak at their cohort. They paid me out of their pockets because they were getting ready to graduate and hadn't received a class on trauma or neuroscience.
Wow. Yeah, it still happens, doesn't it? I was in a yoga class the other day, and the teacher just clearly didn't have any consent training or trauma aware training. They were totally not connected to the group, but they were doing a lovely downward dog. But I'm pretty sure they had zero training in their 200 hours. I mean, even a couple of hours on trauma or social regulation would have given them a better sense. But yeah. Okay. And any other sort of, let's do sort of quick tips here then. So for the parents who are listening, they've got their teenagers, they've got their kids. Right now it's pretty challenging times. Any sort of tools you want to share with them?
Yeah. I think the most important idea is understanding that us as parents, I'm a parent as well, our nervous systems and the state of our nervous system is the most important piece in our control within our household. And so if we're yelling at our kid to calm down, or we're feeling really anxious and telling them to be quiet or whatever it might be, their protector brain, it's called neuroception, their protector brain is constantly scanning the environment to go, how's this person's nervous system? Am I getting any alarm signals here? Or am I getting cues of safety? And of course, that's not a conscious thought process, but that either creates activation in their nervous system or resources it, helps it stabilize. And so really doing this inner journey for ourselves as parents and understanding our somatics and what's happening in our nervous systems at any given moment is really the biggest effect, the biggest bang for our buck that we can have in our houses.
And I would say that's for all embodiment teachers too, the quality of the yoga teacher, the quality of tone. We were just doing my friend a body, mind centering dance class online, and the teacher had a really nice mix of hippie and German, and it was just right. It was like, mwah, it was just German enough to feel secure and just hippie enough that you didn't feel tyrannized. And it was just her tone of voice made me go, oh, I love this. I'm already getting something from this. You know, it made me much more open to what she was saying. It made me, you know, I was kind of feeling safe and relaxed. I've never done a class with this teacher before. And, you know, that I've really noticed that while teaching abroad, because I work a lot with interpreters. And what I started to notice was it almost didn't matter that I had an interpreter, because people were paying attention to me and the emotional message was landing first and stronger than whatever the translator said. You sort of see it sequentially with that. And I actually had to train my translators, because otherwise they would ruin the emotional message if they were really stressed or, you know, whatever.
Yes, I think that's such a great example or illustration for anybody that's working with youth or just in general embodiment coaches, to think of that idea of like the words that you're using have so much less of an impact as the physical presence you're bringing and the state of your nervous system that's being communicated through your facial muscles, through the intonation of your voice, through your posture, all of that good stuff. And again, kids have a good reader on that, and you'll get resistance if you're trying to come across as something that you don't embody.
We play a game on one of my coach trainings where we say the worst possible things, I mean, things I probably wouldn't put on a podcast, in the nicest possible ways. So the game is to make someone feel loved while saying awful, awful things. And it's, I'm going to kill you, you know, I'm going to murder you, and whatever, and worse than that, actually. And it's really fun. You can make people smile and they're hugging each other. But if you were to just write down the words, it's just like absolutely horrific. And we're sort of proving, obviously words are important too, but we're proving the point that of the two, that's the thing that's making the impact for the child or the student or the coachee in our case.
Yeah. So continuing along with tips, there's another one I'm thinking of for parents, educators, embodiment teachers, whoever it is. Whatever your own inner process is, if you're able to give a language to that, then you're naturally modeling for kids, young people, whoever you're working with, that process of connecting mind and body. So I can be an instructor and I can say, notice your breath. Or as a parent or an instructor, I can say, oh, as I sit here on my yoga mat, I'm noticing my breath is kind of shallow and I'm having a hard time getting to the place I want to be when I want to start this class. So I'm going to take just a few moments and I put my hand on my heart. That's more of a message than
because kids copy what you do, not what you say, right? So if you're actually demoing it, that's just much more impactful.
Our clients do too, by the way. I mean, I don't.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's also a tool that I love to recommend, and you saw that in the embodiment conference. It's called body mapping, and it's especially helpful with young kids. But I do this with teens and even adults who like to do art or get stuff out on paper. It's just the outline of a body, and you invite them to think about a time they felt really strong or confident. They kicked the goal in soccer, or they got a surprising grade on something they worked really hard on, or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a physical thing. And you invite them, as they're noticing that, they tell you the story about it, and you ask them if they can if they can notice any sensations like it was back at that time when that actually happened. And when they have a sense of it, you can say, okay, now put that feeling on the paper. Can you draw what that felt like in your body using colors, shapes, anything that you want to make it look like? And you just kind of sit there quietly while they finish it, and then invite them to tell you the story of what they drew and take you through the different sensations they experienced. And this helps bridge that mind body. And we always start with resilience. We always start with empowered feeling instead of tell me about the worst day of your life and put that on the paper.
Right. The resourcing. Okay, let's start with that, and then you can return back to that, right? You can be like, oh, remember that warm feeling in your chest, and you can, if stuff gets a bit overwhelming, you can come back to that as a sort of happy place. Yeah. Nice. Okay, what about this? So you've gone from TV celebrity. Now we're going to make you ruler of the world, queen of the whole world. And you get to sort of make some new laws. You know, you're in office, you're like Joe Biden, first day in office kind of thing. You know, we're recording this sort of, just after inauguration, but the whole world, not just America. And you get to make a few laws, set a few things that are like, now obviously you might say, I don't want to be a dictator. Yeah, I get it. You're nice, you're a liberal. But You are. That's the situation we're in. What do you lay down as the new trauma sensitive laws for the whole world?
I would say this mindfulness and neuroscience education for every child, for sure.
Standard in school.
One.
Standard school education.
Yes.
Reading, writing, maths, trauma education.
Right. And, the challenging part of that is anyone within a system trying to deliver that has to be appropriately trained to be able to deliver that in an effective way. So again, here we come with trying to make a law, but then really needing to look at the effects of that before just making it a blanket statement.
Well, any dictatorial law goes against principles we talked about earlier, right? So I say this with some irony. Okay, so you'd make it, that would be a better world, wouldn't it? A better, where physical education teachers were trained in this, where school counselors were trained in this, where police were trained in this. If police understood fight or flight, I think there'd be a safer, better world for everyone. Right? Like, who else? I'm just trying to think who else. Doctors, I definitely want doctors to have some training in this. Nurses to have some training in this. I was with a load of Filipino nurses. I had to have a metal tube put down my throat a few months back. It was quite unpleasant. Because I'd forgot to order a taxi, I couldn't get anesthetic, so I had to have it sort of done unanesthetized, which apparently is a terrible idea. But I was surrounded by these 5 wonderful Filipino nurses who were just wonderfully co-regulating me the entire time. And I don't think they were trained in it. I think they were. I think it was a cultural thing from what I've seen of other Filipinos actually. And Irene Lyon talks about this actually. And I thought, wow, that was handy. But I've also been around nurses that weren't trained in that. Or didn't have that culturally, like I see in Mexico or some places. I've been around other nurses that I thought, God, that would have been a lot more comfortable had they been trained in a bit of that. So any other sort of professions we think could benefit this? Nurses, police,
sports
doctors,
coaches,
sports coaches, yoga teachers.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, or policymakers, for sure. Politicians.
Yeah, the criminal justice system would look pretty different, wouldn't it, if this was understood as part of how people make bad decisions?
Yes.
Okay. Anything we haven't talked about that you sort of love, that you're just like, that's my thing, I really want to say that? We still have a little bit of time. So is there anything that you're like, oh, I'd love to say that on Mark's podcast?
I think we covered all the main things.
Well, I've enjoyed it. It's relaxing. I can tell when I've got someone on who practices what they teach when it comes to trauma and stress, because I feel more relaxed at the end of the podcast. I feel like, that was nice. I'd like to have a cup of tea with them sometime. So that's definitely how I'm feeling in my body now. So, I imagine listeners can feel that, at least from your voice, if not mine. Probably a bit too much caffeine. So where do people find you online? Where do people find you? What do people search on Amazon for your books? Where do people find your stuff?
Yeah, my books are on Amazon. You can find everything from my website. It's wisemindservices.com. Books are on Amazon. Peanut and the Big Feelings is my guidebook for children. It's illustrated. It's got an adult implementation guide in the back, so adults can learn how to use the mind-body tools and teach the neuroscience. I also have a new journey with a membership-based training and support site. So I've boiled down all of these bite-sized, accessible neuroscience and mind-body tools that I've worked with over the last 15 years into a training and support site. And that's a monthly thing people can join and get support in the forum or do a monthly call with me.
At that website, once again, just to say it one more time, give people the chance to write it down if they're listening to the podcast.
wisemindservices.com.
wisemindservices.com. Great. And we usually finish with a closing message about the body. So do you have a closing message about the body for everyone out there?
When you understand yourself from that mind-body connection place, and you know how to use these tools of coming back to your home, coming back to your resilience, coming back to yourself, then you can use that no matter what situation you're in, where you are in your life, to come to that place with a more whole self.
Jenifer, thank you so much for joining us today.